Welcome to Decarbonizing Today, a deep dive into the Edmonton Metro region's role in addressing the global climate crisis. In this episode, we have your Edmonton Global host, Mustafa Sahin, here with Greg Panuccio, the Director of Business Development with Linde, Canada.
Welcome, Greg.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Great timing to see you. I've got a couple questions. You know, we sort of stick to a script, but then I feel like we're going to have just a really good, friendly conversation because we've known each other for about 3 years since you first took your role. And it's been a long journey towards what will be one of the questions later about an FID in Linde.
Right.
But let me start with, let's start about that. So Linde recently made a major announcement about its investment in clean hydrogen production in the Edmonton region, specifically in Fort Saskatchewan. Can you provide an overview of the project that was announced at FID, including sort of the scale, the objectives, and the impact you expect it to have on the local economy and energy transition?
Yeah, that's right. So a couple of weeks ago, Linde made an announcement of a contract completion with Dow and a final investment decision on the project to make what we think is as far as we know, the world's largest blue hydrogen facility happening right here in Edmonton. So that's very exciting. We're going to be supplying hydrogen to Dow for their Path to Zero cracker conversion, where they're going to be switching their fuel from traditional hydrocarbon fuels, off gases, natural gas, over to a completely hydrogen fuel source to do their ethane to ethylene cracking projects. And we are providing all that infrastructure and capability to give them that reliable supply of hydrogen to be able to operate that furnace and make those products to generate a lower carbon intensity ethylene product for the market. And we're pretty excited about that. We're going to be, as part of the project, investing $2 billion, which is, again, I think Linde's largest single investment on a project. And we're going to be sequestering 2 million tons a year of CO2. And we're, going to be making a big contribution to, Canada's goals and towards this, journey to zero that we want to get to, while still maintaining, the important industries and services that Canadians really want to have, to have quality of life and the good products that help to make that happen.
Everybody loves numbers. Everybody loves a good soundbite. I love the $2 billion number. And we know that's just an estimate. It may come in, more or close to that, but
hopefully not anymore.
But the other thing that I think is important is, as you mentioned, you alluded to, Dow's big announcement of a path to zero for ethylene or plastics,
right,
is not possible without Linde's contribution to that project. And that project was a $9 billion announcement just in December, right?
Yeah.
And these are some of the largest projects of their kind globally.
Right.
I think that's important to highlight. And when you just referenced the amount of CO2 that will be captured, 2.2 million tons. To put that in context, that's probably the same amount that is currently being captured in total in Alberta on an annual basis.
It's on the order of magnitude, I believe.
Yeah.
You've got a couple of projects that have been operating in a long time. And in fact, that history of that operation of sequestration in Alberta is one of the key enablers that helped both Linde and Dow to make the final decision to invest and make this project, because it's not like, well, certainly you're paving new roads and doing new things, but having that history of that sequestration capability and know-how within the heartland and within Alberta really helps to give confidence in that decision to proceed to add on to that with this meaningful volume that we'll be adding.
And do we have a rough timeline for how long this project will take to reach completion?
So I think our latest estimate is 2028 for a startup.
Okay. So about 3 years.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So Linde's decision to invest in clean hydrogen production in the Edmonton region is a significant step. Can you walk us through the factors that made this region the right choice for this major investment?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of things, obviously. You have to have a great partner, a great customer. Dow, they're really trailblazers, making a decision that, without Dow making the decision that they're going to do the Path to Zero project in Edmonton, then we don't have a project ourselves to do. And so I think that, having Dow take the step to say, this is our goal, this is how we're going to achieve it, and focus on Edmonton to be the place to do that, is a big cornerstone for enabling that project to happen. And then you have all the other critical aspects of the reasons that you want to invest in Canada, right? So you've got a great workforce here that knows how to execute these types of projects. You've got a history of investment and reliable investment in the region that gives the decision makers and the final decision makers and the boards confidence that this is a great place to invest. You've got a government in place that's working their hardest to find avenues to facilitate these types of investments with incentives, with bankable, emissions policies. And without all those things coming together, as well as a great technology offering from the Linde team and the Linde engineering, and a great team on both sides between Dow and Linde to figure out how to make this happen. Those are all those key factors have to come together for the stars to align for a project to happen.
I think I want to build a little bit on what you were saying. I think a lot of people don't realize the unique combination of elements which exists in Alberta and in the Edmonton region globally that have allowed this project to come together, right? So the combination of incentives, both from the federal government and Alberta's provincial government.
And the local governments.
Right? That's stacked to allow that. A lot of people talk about IRA and 45Q in the US, but Canada actually on total, when you put everything together, is competitive. And then when you look at the incredible geology that we have in Alberta for carbon storage, the infrastructure for carbon transport that already exists, those are not things to be taken lightly. And without those, this project probably doesn't happen. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. In Alberta, you have the upstream and the downstream side of the equation to complete the picture for this. You've got the oil and gas industry and the petrochemical industry that have been established here and successfully operating here, and had companies want to build plants for petrochemicals, for refining in this area. And then you've got this geology that's here that helps on the downstream side to enable the sequestration of CO2, which is really the fundamental aspect of the path to zero approach. So you've got that legacy of existing large scale, big projects with sophisticated companies that know their business, and a policy in place that helps to motivate companies to want to actually invest in a sustainable project, as well as the lowest cost options for finding a bankable solution for a sustainable operation, right? So CO2 capture, and then also around the cost to actually put projects on the ground and to get equipment in place and the right solutions in place.
And I think, you talked about bankable, this project and similar projects probably don't happen if there isn't the stick incentive, which is a carbon tax that exists in Canada, right?
Right.
And that's something which is slightly different between the Canada and the US today, right?
Right.
That's a significant motivator for corporates on one side, but then combining that stick with the carrot, which is the incentives on the other side,
yes,
that combination is, I think, really important. And I think one thing that was interesting too is the existing availability for sequestration, capacity, and transportation in Canada is unique. We were just with our friends from Norway who were on this panel, and they were talking about, there's a project, industrial sequestration project in Oslo, and they're basically going to have to capture the CO2, put it on trucks, truck it to the port, transport it by ship around to the other coast of Norway, and then re-inject it to do an offshore sequestration project. Whereas a Shell executive in the UK last week said, our project in Canada, in Alberta, we just sort of capture it, transport it 3 meters by pipeline, and then straight down. Those costs factor into the overall financial bankability or viability of projects like this, right?
That's right. Okay.
I
think having the carrot and the stick working together, as well as that low cost option to have a local sequestration capability, all of those things are the reason that projects are happening in Alberta and in Canada.
And let's be clear, Linde is not new to Alberta. Right? This is a new project, but maybe touch on Linde's history of, in the space and providing, clean air, clean oxygen and hydrogen and all these things here.
That's right. Yeah. So Linde's, our corporate tagline is making the world more productive. We understand really well how to do business in Canada and how to do our business in Canada. And especially in Alberta, So pivoting over to Alberta, we've been operating in Alberta for decades, and supplying, the operators and the businesses that drive the economic engine of Alberta, which then drives the economic engine of the manufacturing in Canada. We've been doing that and supporting those businesses for decades. So making oxygen for a chemical plant, making nitrogen to support the blanketing and the purging and all those little things that you need to do to have an operating petrochemical facility. We've been doing. We also capture CO2 here. We've been capturing CO2 here for decades. We then use it, so it's more on the utilization side. But anytime you go into your grocery store, open up the freezer, and buy a pizza, there's a pretty good chance that pizza, it could have been frozen with CO2 from Linde that we captured in Fort Saskatchewan. And so I think we've got a long history of demonstrated success that makes us put Canada as a priority for growing that business and contributing to Linde's global growth plans as a priority in Canada.
Well, and I think it's important to reiterate that point for those who don't know. Linde is a global operator with global operations. So when you are looking at bankability or financial viability of projects, you're comparing jurisdictions to each other across the globe.
That's right.
So it further reinforces that your familiarity with Canada, your familiarity with Alberta, with the Edmonton region played a part in the overall decision, right?
Any capital that gets spent at Linde comes out of a global capital pool. All of the regional business units that operate in Linde, United States, Canada, the UK, Japan, China, we're all competing for the same global pot of capital that our board of directors approves for us to spend on new projects every year to grow our business. And so it's our job as business development people to bring the right projects and the right opportunities to our board, to our senior management, so that they can pick those best projects to add to the value of Linde stakeholders. And clearly, the project that we've developed with Dow is floated to the top, as it's our largest project we've ever decided to invest in our history.
So building on that, the $2 billion investment by Linde opens the door for future major projects and investments in the region. How do you see this facility serving as a catalyst for further clean energy developments? And what kinds of opportunities do you anticipate emerging from this initiative? So we know you've got a large offtake customer. There's going to be significant supply of clean hydrogen. And that's just in phase one, but there's already plans for a phase two. What other things could happen? Dominoes could fall by having that presence here.
Yeah. Well, one obvious thing is that we've got excess capacity at this site that will be marketing out into the other users in the region. So I think that helps to get potentially other companies that are looking to take advantage of opportunities for decarbonizing their operations or making their operations more sustainable. They get to leverage Linde's investment in this large project to perhaps make some investments on their own and utilize additional products that we'll have available as a result of building this unit. This is predominantly for Dow, but not everything is for Dow. And so that's one certainly.
Could we see Linde fueling stations for the trucking sector, for example?
That would be fantastic. Yeah. I think we'll definitely keep our eyes open for those types of things. I think there's other opportunities that could materialize from similar scales of what Dow is doing, because other companies will see what's happening at Dow and our ability to execute projects. The whole when I say we here, I mean the whole Alberta Industrial Heartland ecosystem. Right. And that'll give other companies the potential to say, you know what, when I'm going and reviewing projects and evaluating opportunities and I apply risk metrics to my process of evaluating and prioritizing opportunities on where I want to invest, I think that there's a good chance that with Linde and Dow working together to do this project, the risk that gets discounted onto the projects that are under evaluation, hopefully will become smaller. And so then that helps to then move those projects up in the priority list for other folks to want to, other companies to want to, other companies to want to execute those.
Yeah, 100%. When we look at, continue to develop a hydrogen ecosystem in the Edmonton region, we're talking about transportation applications. This could help to accelerate that. This could help to accelerate the adoption for sustainable aviation fuels and hydrogen application in aviation, for consumer power and residential power. and like you said, other industrials who are looking to decarbonize, right? So I think that's not to be ignored, that this will have domino effects.
That's right. And we're also going to learn quite a bit from doing this project, obviously. Right. There's going to be a lot to learn, and we can apply that to the future and leverage that to help to make those projects even more efficient.
So Linde's at the forefront of clean energy technologies. We touched on nitrogen and carbon capture and oxygen. What role do you believe hydrogen will play in helping industries decarbonize while still driving economic growth, particularly in energy-intensive sectors? So plastics is one. We've been hearing talk this week about cement. There's ongoing talk about steel, some of these sort of quote-unquote hard-to-abate sectors.
Right.
What role does a project like this play in trying to also move those types of opportunities forward?
Yeah, so I guess the buzzword is the hard-to-abate industries. And I think that hydrogen has a critical role to play in achieving targets that a lot of companies have put out there in sustainability goals. It's not the only path forward, but I think through this project, you'll see those companies taking a harder look at hydrogen as a viable option. And there's been a lot of work done already to look at industries like steel and using hydrogen in steel. And I think that maybe that's another area where you could see some opportunities coming out in the future. There's really, I guess the sky's the limit.
Okay. and which is a good segue back to sustainable aviation fuels, right?
Sustainable aviation fuels. Yeah, the sky's the limit. I did that on purpose.
I know you did. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that the Edmonton International Airport is a key partner in this entire play, for you, for us in our ecosystem, trying to drive the adoption of hydrogen in all their applications as well.
Right.
The global demand for clean hydrogen is expected to grow rapidly in the coming years. What lessons can other regions or industries take from Linde's approach in Alberta, and how can these lessons be applied to scale clean hydrogen production in other jurisdictions where you're playing?
One of the things that you can apply, certainly one of the things that other companies can apply from learnings from this project is how to appropriately incorporate the carrots and the sticks together. I mean, until you actually sit down and start figuring out, how do I monetize these investment tax credits? How do I generate the sequestration credits for the CO2? How do I apply those to my operations most efficiently? There's going to be a lot of learning that's going to happen there, and hopefully it goes both ways.
This is also going to play a significant part. You talk about economies of scale at driving down the cost of that hydrogen too, right? And the lower the cost goes, the more broadly it can be applied, or maybe a subsidy would need to be applied by government to accelerate adoption, not unlike EVs had to go through, right?
That's correct.
So I think that's an important part too, right? I mean, the largest clean hydrogen project that Linde's taken on, right?
That's right.
So that's a point we shouldn't forget about. I also want you to highlight for us something that's unique about this project, which is that my understanding is it's a fuel substitution project for Dow in this case, right? Where you're trying to substitute natural gas with clean hydrogen, right?
Right.
So that's kind of a unique approach that we haven't seen a lot of, and there's probably going to be some learnings from that.
So there are fundamentally some different options that you have at your disposal if you want to try to reduce emissions and you are consuming fuel. You can burn natural gas and hydrocarbons and then try to capture the CO2 from the flue gas. Or you could try to capture the CO2 from the fuel before you burn it. And I think each of those approaches has its own benefits and challenges, and some will be applied in certain applications, others will be applied in other applications. For Dow, they evaluated the options and they decided that they wanted to do the fuel switching approach, which is where you take the CO2 out of the fuel before you burn it. Okay. And one of the, there are several benefits for taking that approach. You have CO2, when you're taking the CO2 out of a process stream, in this case, it's higher concentration, it's higher pressure, and that makes the separation of the CO2 out of the fuel stream simpler or efficient, both from a capital and an operating expense. You have it all in one place. All that CO2 that you're going to be using in your process is in that one pipe there that you can focus on pulling it out at that point. But in other places, you may need to have the other approach where you pull the CO2 out after your combustion processes, and there's options for that as well. And we have technology for that in projects around the world that are also taking that approach. And so I think that hydrogen is certainly a big part of the solution for the sustainability approach, and in the context of fuel switching, and low carbon intensity fuel utilization. But there are other customers and other applications where the post-combustion capture approach might make more sense.
Coming back to another question, we talked about growing global demand for clean hydrogen. Do you see your operations in Alberta as being a template for future increased production that could actually be used to supply other markets? And I'm specifically looking at California. Export. I'm looking at, Japan, Korea, other markets that are looking. If we're able to safely transport the hydrogen to the coast, the Pacific coast of Canada, could you see this being a hub to supply more and then exporting from Canada as well?
So I think Canada, if I can broaden the lens a bit and just look at Canada as a whole.
Yes.
Canada is uniquely positioned in that it's got great tidewater access. It's got great access to markets that are looking for imports for low carbon fuel solutions, both in the Pacific and the Atlantic. And it's the reason those markets those export markets are looking for companies, or looking for countries like Canada to help them to solve those low carbon fuel problems, is because they don't have the same assets that Canada has to be able to produce these low carbon fuels. So I think there's a lot of issues and problems that we're going to have to figure out to really enable that export market. And it might, obviously, the first projects that are happening are all domestic use case scenarios. Mm-hmm. But while they're the first, I don't think they'll be the last. I think there will be some opportunities for exports in the future. It's just different problems to solve that, we'll need to have companies taking the lead to drive those use cases home to their stakeholders.
And being a multinational operator like Linde is and others, rather than looking at a U.S. versus Canada, Gulf Coast versus Alberta or Eastern Canada, do you see a scenario where there's a more integrated North American energy supply to both Europe and Asia, where players are looking at, we need a place of operation in the Gulf Coast, but we need a secondary one in Alberta or maybe one in Eastern Canada, because there are shipping challenges and political challenges and logistics challenges, and that it could almost be more integrated?
Well, I think my short answer to that question is, I think if we learned anything in COVID, it's just having a diversified supply network and supply system is critical to the world economy that we have today. If you're relying too much on single source, on a single approach for operation critical feedstocks and supplies, then you're at risk for disruption there. And so I think that there's a pretty good chance that it might, I don't know what level of coordination you're going to get, but certainly I think you'll see projects develop where there's, opportunities that for them to make sense, and that a diversified supply, global supply system will probably win out in the end.
And energy security is not something we talked about a lot 3 years ago,
right,
before Russia invaded Ukraine, and yet now it's becoming a real consideration because of these, right, disruptions to supply chain. And we don't think that's going to be unique going forward, right? And COVID was another one.
Yeah.
So, I hope that we can play a part, and I hope that, the cooperation, collaboration, across borders, and whether it's political or not, I think the companies themselves who are doing the projects are the ones who are going to make that happen.
Yeah, I think Canada is certainly the government of Canada, the companies that operate in Canada, they are focused on trying to find solutions to not only support and optimize their operations domestically, but then look to outside markets to be able to then utilize what they've learned from doing those projects to perhaps adding additional phases of new trains that they could apply those additional capacities to other markets outside of domestic uses.
Yeah, and I think it's important. I think Canada has an increasing role to play in global energy decarbonization as well.
That's right.
But we need partners, industry partners, foreign partners like yourself, to come and help us develop the natural resources we have here to address those markets.
I think Canada, in Canadian history, have done an excellent job of recognizing the resources that are contained in this great country, right? And that they are abundant, and that they are blessed to have these resources. And they've done a great job to figure out not only how to utilize those resources for the betterment of Canadians in their day-to-day lives through domestic products, but also the betterment of Canadians in their day-to-day lives by having products that other countries want to import from Canada in a responsible way. So finding that balance of utilizing Canadian resources to benefit Canadians both in a domestic utilization sense, as well as in the betterment of being able to responsibly export a portion of those resources to benefit not only Canadians, but then other people around the world.
Greg, it's been a pleasure to have you. I'm so glad you're here. I hope we can make this almost an annual check-in to monitor the progress of this incredible project.
It's a date,
and then celebrate together once when we get the ribbon cutting ceremony. So thanks for being here as always, and thanks for being such a great partner for Canada and for the Edmonton region. We love having you here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for our next episode of Decarbonizing Today, where we meet with Enhance Energy to continue exploring how decarbonizing tomorrow starts today in the Edmonton Metro region.